The diary was open on the kitchen table when I walked in to grab my coffee mug before my shift. I wasn't looking for it. I want that understood from the very start, because in the weeks that followed, more than one person in that family would ask me, in that careful tone people use when they already suspect the answer, whether I'd gone looking. I hadn't. Margaret had left it there, forgotten, after an early morning visit to drop off leftovers from Sunday dinner, and the page facing up caught my eye the way anything handwritten catches the eye of someone who spends her days reading charts. Other people never expected a stranger to read. One line stopped me before I could look away. He still thinks his father died in the accident. If he ever learns the truth, he'll never forgive me. I stood there in my scrubs, mug halfway to my lips, and I felt something in my chest go very still. Not loud, not shattering. Still, the way a hospital corridor goes still in the seconds after a code is called, when everyone is moving, but no one is speaking. 22 years of a story I'd been told without question. David's father, dead in a car accident when David was 12, rearranged itself in the space of a single sentence. I didn't cry. I didn't call out for Margaret, who was still in the driveway saying goodbye to her neighbor. I didn't touch the diary again. I set my mug down, closed the notebook exactly the way I'd found it, cover facing up, corner aligned with the edge of the table, and I walked out to start my 12-hour shift like nothing in my world had just quietly rearranged itself. My name is Sarah Whitfield. I'm 34 years old, and I'm an ICU nurse. I've spent 12 years reading the things bodies say when the people attached to them can't or won't say them out loud. A change in breathing rate, a number on a monitor that doesn't match the story a family is telling itself in the waiting room. People think my job is about machines. It isn't. It's about noticing what doesn't add up before anyone else in the room is ready to admit it doesn't. I built a career on the belief that the truth shows up in the data long before anyone says it out loud. I didn't expect to need that instinct in my own marriage, at my own mother-in-law's kitchen table, over a diary that was never meant for me. I married David 10 years ago. He was steady in a way that made me feel like the ground wouldn't move under me, and devoted to his mother in a way I used to find touching before it started to feel like something I couldn't quite name. Margaret raised him alone from the time he was 12, after his father Robert died, or so I'd always understood, in a single car accident on a rural road outside their old hometown. She never talked about it much. When she did, her voice took on a practiced quality, like a story worn smooth from being told the same way for 22 years. I gave that story the same respect I gave every closed door in that family. I didn't push on it. I told myself some grief simply isn't meant to be excavated by a daughter-in-law, and for a decade, that felt like the right kind of respect to show her. What I carried instead, quietly, for years, was the sense that something in that family didn't fully add up. Small things. The way Margaret's sister, Carol, would go tight around the mouth whenever the accident came up, then change the subject a beat too fast. The way Margaret kept Robert's old physician, Dr. Whitmore, on her Christmas card list, decades after he'd stopped treating anyone in the family, like a debt she was still quietly paying off. Carol was warm to me in every way that mattered. She remembered my birthday. She'd driven 2 hours once to sit with me during a bad flu. But I noticed, over the years, the particular way she watched Margaret manage the family narrative, an expression that sat somewhere between loyalty and something sharper. Admiration and envy wear the same face sometimes, and I never quite worked out which one Carol was wearing until much later. Which brings me back to that morning, and the diary, and the sentence I couldn't unread. I want to walk you through what happened after, because the version I told people at first left out how deliberate I was about it. I finished my shift. I came home. I made dinner. David asked how my day was, and I told him it was busy, which was true, and said nothing else, which was also true in its own way. That was the moment I set my rule for myself. The same rule I use every day at work when a chart doesn't match a patient's story. Gather everything before you say a word out loud. So I didn't ask Margaret about it. I didn't ask David. I started, instead, doing quietly at night what I do professionally every single day. I began looking for the detail that didn't match the record everyone had agreed to believe. I still had a friend, Renata, working in medical records at the regional hospital, where Robert had been initially treated after the accident, decades ago, back before every file went fully digital. I asked her, casually, over coffee, whether old paper archives from that era still existed in storage. She said some did, if you knew what you were looking for, and had a reason good enough to ask. I gave her a reason, a half-true one, about researching family medical history for an insurance form, and 3 days later she found something. Not an accident report. A treatment file, dated 8 months before the accident, from an oncology department 2 towns over. Robert's name. A diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Already metastasized. Already beyond the point where treatment meant anything but time. I sat with that for 3 full days before I did anything else. Because in my line of work, the first thing you find is never the whole chart. People who believe a story is airtight are usually the ones who leave the messiest trail behind it. And I wanted the whole trail, not just the first thread of it. I found the second piece almost by accident. Margaret still keeps meticulous financial records, a habit she'd once told me, from years of tracking every dollar as a single mother. And I found, in an old ledger she'd once shown me proudly as an example of her thriftiness, a series of payments to Dr. Whitmore's private practice, made monthly, for nearly a year after Robert's death. Not medical bills. The amounts were too regular, too round, to be anything but a private arrangement between two people who needed each other to stay quiet about something. For a week, I believed I understood the shape of the secret. I believed Robert's death hadn't been an accident at all, that grief and terminal pain had led him somewhere darker, and that Margaret and Dr. Whitmore had quietly altered the record to spare a 12-year-old boy the particular shame our small hometown still attached, back then, to a death like that. I even rehearsed, in the shower, in the car, the exact sentence I'd use to finally ask her about it. Then Renata found the document that didn't fit the story I'd built. It wasn't a coroner's report. It was a letter, folded into the back of that same treatment file, written in Dr. Whitmore's own hand, addressed to Margaret and dated the week before the accident. In it, he confirmed what she'd apparently already decided, that Robert had, in his final clear-headed weeks, made his own choice about how the end would go, and had asked, explicitly, that his son never be told the real cause. Not out of shame, out of mercy. He didn't want David's last memory of him to be built around a hospital bed and a slow unraveling. He wanted his son to remember him whole, driving, competent, still fully his father, right up until the very end. The single-car accident hadn't been staged to hide something ugly. It had been staged, with Robert's full knowledge and consent in his final days, to protect his son from watching him disappear one system failure at a time. Margaret hadn't been hiding a scandal. She'd been keeping a dying man's last wish for 22 years, alone, at the cost of a decade of quiet guilt she apparently still couldn't set down. Even now, writing about it in a diary she thought no one but herself would ever read. I confirmed the final piece of it with Dr. Whitmore directly. He's retired now, in his 70s, and when I called and told him carefully what I'd found, he didn't deny a word of it. He told me, in a voice that cracked more than once, that altering a death certificate was the only ethically unforgivable thing he'd done in 40 years of practice, and that he'd done it because Robert had begged him, and because Margaret had been standing in that hospital room too, agreeing to carry the weight of the lie so her son never had to. I wasn't in the room when the truth finally reached the rest of the family. I heard about it secondhand, from Carol, in more detail than I ever expected to receive. She told me it happened at David's 40th birthday dinner, of all occasions, that Margaret stood up mid-toast, her hands trembling around a glass of wine she hadn't touched all evening, and said there was something she needed to say before she let another year pass carrying it alone. Carol said the table went quiet in that particular way. A room goes quiet, right before something finally breaks open after decades of pressure. She said David's face went pale as his mother spoke, that he set his fork down without finishing the bite already in his mouth, that his hand found the edge of the table like he needed something solid to hold onto while the ground rearranged itself under him, the same way mine had, weeks earlier, over her open diary. Carol said her own husband actually reached for her hand under the table when Margaret said the words, "He asked me to lie to you," and that afterward, for a long, strange minute, nobody at that table looked at David directly. They looked at their plates, the way people do when they aren't sure it's their place to witness someone else's grief rewriting itself in real time. I met Margaret myself 3 days later, at my own kitchen table this time, on my own terms. I didn't know how to give it back to him, she said, smaller than I'd ever seen her, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she never drank. Every year that passed made the lie feel more permanent than the truth underneath it. And it wasn't only my secret to carry anymore, it was Dr. Whitmore's too, and I let that shared weight become an excuse to keep saying nothing. I understand why you did it, I told her. I understand a dying man's last wish, and I understand a mother trying to honor it for a frightened 12-year-old. What I don't understand is the woman who let her son believe a story for 22 years, instead of trusting him, eventually, with the harder, truer one. Understanding why you did it isn't the same as agreeing it was right to keep doing it this long. She asked, quietly, if I thought David would ever be able to forgive her. I told her that wasn't a question for me to answer, and that some things only heal in the room where the two of them finally say them out loud to each other, without me standing in between. David and I talked that night, longer than we'd talked in years. He didn't ask me why I hadn't told him the moment I found the diary. He understood, I think, that I'd needed to be certain before I handed him a truth that large. We didn't need lawyers or settlements. This wasn't that kind of betrayal. But we did sit down together, deliberately, and agree on something new. That our own family, whatever it became, would never again let a comfortable silence stand in for an uncomfortable truth. We wrote it down, half joking, half serious, like our own quiet version of a family charter. No more inherited silences. Whatever it costs to say something honestly, we pay it while it's still small. A year has passed since that morning, with the diary on the kitchen table. I still work in the ICU, but I've started something new alongside it. A small evening support group, at first just for hospital families, then eventually for anyone navigating a terminal diagnosis and the agonizing question of how much truth to share, and when, and with whom. I use the same instincts there that I once used to trace a single line in an old diary back through 22 years of silence, patience, and the refusal to accept a story simply because everyone has agreed, for a long time, to leave it unexamined. Sometimes the greatest kindness isn't protecting someone from a hard truth forever. It's finally trusting them enough to carry it themselves. If you'd found that diary open on the table that morning, would you have read on, the way I did? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and whether you think Margaret's silence was mercy, or something closer to betrayal. And if stories like this one stay with you, subscribe for more. There's always another quiet woman with a truth worth uncovering.